Welcome back to World War Live or World War Now or whatever this is. It's a Friday evening. I'm here with Dmitry Kalyagin, usually not here on the live streams, but he's with us tonight for a special edition, a special, breaking news, special, deep content World War Now live stream, Ether Hour live stream. Who knows what? Maybe that's what this is. This is an Ether Hour live stream. People say they can't hear. How's the audio? Can people actually hear me? Dmitry, can you hear me?
Sounds good on my end.
Well, it sounds fine to there's no mute. This is probably just a person trolling, but if people in the chat can let us know that they can hear us, that would be greatly appreciated. I know this isn't our usual time that I'm live on Tuesday evenings, so yeah, the audio is fine. We're being trolled by some gay homosexuals, so if anybody wants to ban this person, delete their comments, easy done. I don't think we have any mods in the chat because they're all who knows where they're at. But we're here, World War Live episode with Dmitry Kalyagin. We're going to be talking about my trip to the Donbass. We're sorry we're a little bit late. Some major technical difficulties. Not really sure what was going wrong there, but here we are. And we're going to be going live. Like I said, this is probably a good thing to call this an Ether Hour live stream because we are going to be going live on Substack after the first, I don't know, hour 15 minutes or so, hour and a half of this stream. We're going to be going live on Substack for paid subscribers. So if you're not behind the paywall and you want to see, behind the paywall, we're going to be reacting to the full video, the full interview that I did with the St. Alexander Nevsky Brigade on the front line in Donbass. That was the first piece of Donbass content I released so far. And I guess before we even dive too much into it, I guess I've got a lot of things to announce, but yeah, we're going to be going behind the paywall for a stream. So if you're not behind the paywall, click the link down below, get behind the paywall on Substack. It's quite affordable. You get access to hundreds and hundreds of hours of Ether Hour content, and you get to see the full interview I did with the Alexander Nevsky Brigade before it's eventually available to everyone for free. So before we tease some more of the upcoming Donbass content, Dmitry, how are you doing?
Doing amazing, Conrad. Obviously, this was incredibly important to relay to the people, the documentary, the footage that you filmed. And I thought it was a good idea to release it in segments. That way, and I mean, you would have probably agreed initially to double, triple the content because there's so much to discuss. Like, as you'll see later on the paid segment, the documentary itself is great, but there's also all kinds of context that can be added. Like, the soldiers themselves, the footage that you filmed. There's all kinds of stories and information about the places in Ukraine, which Conrad has been to, which really just needs to be fleshed out. Like, there isn't enough information online, unfortunately, on YouTube, in documentary or audio form, anywhere, really, on any podcast that explains what are these towns, their significance, what are their links to, say, Orthodox Christianity in general, and what have they gone through since 2014 or since the 2013 Maidan. So, we're just going to have to describe everything in the most thorough of detail and make it very interesting for you. So this is, I think, what we're here to do. And also, if Conrad, of course, enriches us with some of the knowledge he has, I mean, being so close to the front line at such a key point in time. I mean, this isn't 2024 anymore, right? There's over 200,000 Russian and Ukrainian troops, respectively, within 100 kilometers of your positions in the footage that we'll later see. So that's absolutely incredible. As scary as it is, it's also very apocalyptic in some capacity too. So very, very awesome discussions to come, definitely.
Yes, and if you have any questions you want answered here on the free stream, be sure to send in a super chat. We will answer everything, even if it's just for $2. So support the show. Maybe you can't afford the $7 to get behind the paywall, even though I think you get a free month if you start off at first. So there's really no excuse to not join us behind the paid subscriber paywall on the upcoming stream. But obviously, for now, we're going to give a lot of context. We'll watch the first few minutes maybe of the video near the very end, and then we'll react to the rest of it. But I want to encourage everybody as well that it isn't just going to be the full version of this interview and future Ether Hour episodes that you'll get access to if you are behind the paywall, upcoming very soon in the next 6, 7 days or so, we will be releasing the full version of my interview with Gabriel Doroshin, who I fortuitously ran into in the Donbass. I'll probably record a brief segment that'll be attached to the video, but we weren't even supposed to meet him, as it were, while we were down there. We had a whole bunch of other plans, but we ran into him randomly at a gas station. So, God really made a lot of things happen on this trip, as well as, of course, protecting me from, dangerous situations. Many people have seen Buck Johnson's interview with me. I think I talked about this on World War Now in the last episodes. But yeah, I mean, there were all sorts of dangerous situations that we were in, and God obviously made sure myself, Andre, the rest of the people with us were doing all right. So again, thank you all so much for tuning in. Like I said, I know this isn't the usual stream time. It's been like a month since I've gone live anyway. So thank you all for being here. Share the stream, retweet the stream. If you're on Substack, eventually, head on over there and you'll get a notification for the future stream for paid subscribers. So obviously the replay for this will exist as well. So thank you all for tuning in. And like I said, we'll answer all Substack questions, but I do have some things I want to show people. Obviously, in the brief video, even just the intro video that's going to be posted for all of the Donbass interviews, you can see me getting the patch from the St. Alexander Nevsky Brigade. This is what it looks like more up close, very aesthetic. So we, I have a few of these. And another thing that's cool, I have a few of the patches just themselves, but on this, what does it say? Let me pull up the translation of what this says. Yes, it says, "Unite Russian people, I am counting on you," which is a quote from Nicholas II. I got this from the member of the Nicholas II Tsar St. Nicholas II Rocket Brigade. So they launch rockets at the Ukrainians. So I have a few of these as well, and this will be hanging on the wall somewhere with a quote, from Nicholas II, and of course the Mandilion Christ flag that everybody flies in the SMO zone on the Russian side. So some cool items I got from the SMO zone, and it was quite the trip. The pictures that you saw where I interviewed those guys and met up with them, that was kind of in the near the border between the Donetsk and the Lugansk region, not far from the front. So it was very beautiful landscape, actually. I wasn't a lot of the area there is obviously flat, but Lugansk is much more hilly, and then it descends down into the steppe, as it were. So it was quite the experience. But yeah, I mean Alexander Nevsky is considered one of the most popular Russian historical figures by all Russians. So it would make sense that he would be one of the warrior saints that would get his own, brigade. I also, like I said, there's the Tsar St. Nicholas Rocket Brigade. I heard about brigades named after St. Andrew. I heard named after Dmitry Donskoy. I heard about Grand Prince Vladimir, Fyodor Ushakov, a lot of other, saints with their own brigades and battalions and such, and different troop groupings, volunteers and otherwise, that conscripts and others that have decided they want to be named after any number of these great saints. So like I said, the full interview is obviously behind the paywall. It'll be available to everybody soon enough. But yeah, it was quite the experience. It was one of the first days when I was in the SMO zone. I got to ride around in the Akhmat troop carrier, and yeah, maybe in a second I'll pull up the video. We can go through a few points of the beginning of it before we don't want to give it all away for the non-paying subscribers, but it was quite the experience, and it was cool talking to all those guys, because some of them have fought in some very intense battles.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. And just to consider, a lot of those men, as you said, Conrad, they've been through this is multi-year war. This is already, for those Russian soldiers, a longer conflict than the First World War, a longer conflict than most of the wars we read about and the ones we talk about. And definitely, as much as we respect the heroes of, say, 2014, 2015, these men have seen more carnage than people like Givi Motorola, etc. I think however, not to take away anything from the heroism of those early Donbass heroes, because they fought with little to no resources, with essentially a group of volunteers who weren't paid even a salary. There was no guarantee of any post-death compensation, right? Which these soldiers today do have, because the Russian government has amply rewarded all patriots and all sort of future heroes of Russia who are either injured or put down their lives in service to the fatherland. So that wasn't there back in the day. Back in the day, you just had to go and fight essentially against this new Ukrainian Maidan government out of pure conviction and receive nothing for it, except maybe some sort of historical recognition later into the future. I mean, as we're speaking now, 11 years later. So I think that's probably the difference. But nevertheless, it's absolutely insane. Obviously, the warfare has also changed in the last decade. A lot more drones, a lot more electronics, equipment on both sides is of the highest grade, the highest order, and unfortunately, a lot more people have died as well. So they must have lost countless comrades, people they've shacked with, worked with, literally dug trenches with, and the summers there are incredibly hot. So Conrad, I think you were there in essentially autumn, and it was still fairly warm. And the summer this year in 2025 in Malorussia, Novorossiya was incredibly scorching hot. So there was drought issues, as you know. There was people literally dying, some people dying of heat stroke, water shortages, all kinds of issues, things that we could, we kind of expect to only happen in countries like Africa. But no, that's why Russia had such a hard time returning these Ukrainian lands into its fold in the 1800s. It's because it's so hard to have a logistical campaign with huge forces in these plains. It literally looks like the plains of the Serengeti or something. Like, it is just huge land, and absolutely without modern technology it's almost impossible to conquer it.
Yeah, it was right now, obviously, I talked a lot in the interview about the state of warfare and everything, and everyone tries to still talk about, oh, the tanks can't go when the rains really start, and none of that's really relevant anymore. Like, none of the idea of this tanks or moving carrying vehicles with a lot of people in it near the front is just, that's not really realistic. The video where I'm in that troop carrying video, the only reason where I'm that troop carrier, the only reason we're able to do that with that many guys is because we were, fully protected from any drone. We had full air coverage, and we weren't going to be smashed into by a drone. But when you're in the gray zone, when you're up close, I mean, everybody's going to be on electric scooters, motorcycles, these sorts of things that, can individually outrun these drones, can allow people to disperse and get away, because, a $250 drone can completely disable a bajillion-dollar tank, or a troop carrying vehicle can blow it up and kill all 12 people inside of it. And that's just, the money of the economy of war simply wouldn't allow for that. You would lose if you didn't, adjust your strategy. But, here is, the picture with me with the Alexander Nevsky guys holding up the flag. That's in that troop carrying vehicle that we drove around in. It was quite a beast of a thing, even though it was an extremely bumpy ride that we were going on. But it was, I'm seeing a lot of questions. Don't worry, we will answer everybody's questions. But if it isn't related to the immediate topic at hand about Russia and Donbass, we'll save it to the very end so we don't get distracted. But A27, I promise we will answer that question about Metropolitan Tychikos. Don't worry. It's a very important subject. I've been keeping up with it all day anyway. But yeah, I mean, so this was, sort of in the Lugansk, Donetsk, foothills here as the steppe sort of begins, and it was very dusty. There was a beautiful lake nearby with some swans in it. It was quite beautiful, so we had talked to some of these guys. One of the guys named Constantine, another guy I believe Nikolai, forgetting the other name, Alexander. Yeah, so one of them was already also named Alexander. So good Christian names. And like I said, when we were here, a lot of these guys were in the Wagner group at one point, I think, before they then rejoined with this battalion. Some of them were in Bakhmut. A few of them were I'm forgetting where the other battles that they had been, but they had been all over the place, many of them since, 2016, 2017, even sooner. And of course, be sure to get behind the paywall to be the first to be able to watch the Gabriel Doroshin interview that drops, because he talks about, he'd been fighting since 2015, since he was 18 years old at the very beginning. So be sure to check those out. That'll be coming very, very soon. And eventually, I believe all this is going to be put together into sort of one big documentary that will eventually be released for everybody. But we're releasing these interviews one by one for now, because again, you guys, the moment we don't release an Ether Hour 1 week, you guys all start unsubscribing. So got to make a living somehow, right? So there was that. This was also, there's going to be some more content from this much later, maybe 2-3 weeks from now, from the Nikolska Monastery founded by Elder Zosima of Donbass. This is one of the bombed out churches there. You can see the domes in the background that the Ukrainians had shelled. The Ukrainians had aimed for all the crosses at this monastery. We have there's a smaller chapel somewhere else where the cross is hanging by just a few twigs onto the wood. It had been knocked down, but it hadn't fallen off completely from the from the cupola, from the top of the dome that it was on top of. So that was encouraging to see. There's going to be, if you saw in the, maybe I'll play the intro at the beginning before we watch a little bit of the interview with the Alexander Nevsky guys. But yeah, I mean, and also just briefly before we talk about the rest of it, I am going back to Russia and to some interesting places to speak at a conference in the next 2 weeks. So keep me in your prayers for that. It's going to be a good time. There's going to be more content on the way. So hopefully hitting Crimea as well. And again, don't want to spoil all the surprises, but there's going to be some very big things hopefully coming down the pike very soon. But yeah, we'll watch the intro that we had put together that's going to play at the beginning of all the clips, and I'll talk a bit about. After we watch it, I'll pause it and talk a little bit about some of that. But yeah, we'll watch that. It's a cozy vibe for anybody that hasn't.
Okay, so we're in.
All right, pretty cozy vibes. So yeah, thanks to our editor Ben for putting that together with the clips that I sent him. I think it goes hard. But before we talk a little bit about the beginning of this interview, I was going to back up. You can see in the intro, you can see me getting the patch that I showed before. Yeah, right there. Epic moment. And eventually I'm going to talk about this church service as well that we went to with Metropolitan Vladimir, who's like 6'10" tall. So very, very tall bishop. But I want to, just point a few things out in this for context. You see this is our walkie-talkie drone detection device that beeps whenever there's drones nearby, and you can see it says what type of drone. It's an FPV drone. Whoops. FPV drone, the more the first person view drone that you've probably seen a bajillion videos of at this point. And it's beeping red, knowing that there's an FPV drone within the vicinity of our truck. So we had to be on lookout. When you drive, you can see the seatbelt is buckled behind me, because in Donetsk, in the Donbass, you don't drive with your seatbelt, because you're supposed to be able to bail out of the car.
Oh, wow.
And not have to worry about unbuckling your seatbelt if a drone is about to hit you. So it was quite the interesting experience. Everyone drives really fast. When you drive by military vehicles on the road, which there are many, you try to drive around them. You try to not, stay with these petrol cars or these other, things carrying tanks or troop carrying vehicles for too long. But yeah, these, and then you'll see a bunch of cars that have the electronic warfare sort of things on them, where if you press the button, anything within a half kilometer or something, all the drones will get downed. Unfortunately, that doesn't affect the wired drones, of which there are thousands and thousands of these drones on hardwired optic cables that are fiber optic cables that are carried dozens of kilometers across the front. So there's these wires strewn everywhere from these drones. So it's really crazy. The warfare has changed, and we discussed drone warfare and how it's changed it for these guys when you watch the full episode here. But I'm trying to see any other things I should explain. Yeah, in this video where I'm running, we were, there were drones nearby. This is at the entrance from into Donetsk from the Gorlovka direction. But apparently they like to hit people that are taking pictures near the sign, like tourists or anything like that. So we had to run and get back in the car and start driving away, because the drone detectors were going crazy. This is, when you're inside, that's what it looks like. We're in the basement of this church, and the drone detector was going crazy down there. In this video, you can see, overlaid with the flag video, you can see the Russian jet there that flew over us. I don't know what kind it was. If anybody's better at identifying jets than me, they could, try to find out what it was. I don't know, like a MiG or something. But then this was us fortuitously meeting Gabriel Doroshin at the gas station. I'll provide the full clip with the context here.
That's incredible.
But it was quite the moment. So when we release that interview, there will be a bit of context provided. We'll string all of that together, but there's all the context you really need for the intro video. Yeah, there's me in this is us at the grave of Elder Zosima of Donbass. We're probably gonna have a whole episode about him with Andre, who is the person who's the back of the head you're looking at right here. And we'll watch the first 2 or so minutes of this and stop it and comment on it, and then we'll stop, talk about some things, and eventually we'll switch over to for the paid subscribers over on Substack. So go over to World War Now, subscribe, get behind the paywall, become an ether-pilled supporter of the show, and you'll be able to join us on the other side, and we will continue talking about all of this. But what are your thoughts, Dmitry? What are your thoughts on the current state of drone warfare, of what it would mean to be a Christian on the front line? Because that's one of the that's probably the more interesting part of the interview, as I talked to them about what it's how they worship, how they receive communion on the front before battle.
Oh no, look, the questions you ask the soldiers are very important. I think the answers as well, at first they may have surprised me, but when you actually look at the history of Russia, I mean, like, just like all nations, Russia has had many civil wars back in the day, from the very beginning. Literally, Prince Vladimir himself, before Russia was baptized, was going around with small military forces attacking his own blood brothers, literally, and fighting, competing with one another. Like, Russians, unfortunately, or Eastern Europeans in general, in terms of, for political reasons or economic reasons, have gone to war against one another many times. And I think for these particular Russian soldiers, it's very important to distinguish themselves. And they actually highlight that, look, these are just essentially confused versions of ourselves on the other side, with, of course, an adjoined, more evil sort of Western side. And not to say that Westerners are evil in this particular context, but the ones that actually come to Ukraine, to these plains, as if it's some sort of African safari, right? These Western mercenaries, essentially, of which there are tens of thousands. And these soldiers, no doubt, have seen them personally, because we know they fought at Bakhmut, and Bakhmut had many Western mercenaries. It's entirely different. Obviously, most likely the attitude towards them is a lot more, shall we say, less forgiving than it is to even Ukrainians. But also, like, keep in mind, like, you can see a lot from this footage, even this photograph itself that you have in the background here, Conrad. So the first man, I think you mentioned Konstantin in the red beret. If you have a look at that red beret, signifies that he's been through special forces training. He's a frontline member of the Russian Spetsnaz, or at least he was in a past life. So he must be in his mid-30s, perhaps. So he served in the Russian special forces, and which are trained to get behind enemy lines and essentially disrupt communications, which is what we actually discussed right now. The Russian special forces are doing exactly that on motorcycles, quad bikes, and even electric scooters, which are super quiet. They drive through Ukrainian backlines, right? They cut communications, they sabotage certain recon points. So I can't even fathom what level of expertise he might have. And naturally, after you serve your time in the special forces, in the GRU, or in a special Spetsnaz unit, you can then leave the military. And this is probably when he began his service in places like Bakhmut as a member of Wagner, and now in this particular battalion and brigade of St. Alexander Nevsky. So, and we'll talk about volunteer brigades and how they differ from the main Russian armed forces as well later on. But the man in the red beret, there's no such thing as stolen valor on the front lines. As you can see, all these men are armed. He's wearing 20 kilograms right there of, essentially, he's wearing groin guard, he's wearing his full Kevlar. So he clearly understands, like, what exactly is important on the front lines. These are very serious men. They don't just wear uniforms because they look cool. It's not 2014 or 15. And that's, most likely his colleagues very much respect him. And this is the cool thing about the volunteer brigades. They are very much a mishmash of people from different backgrounds and careers. Some with more military training, some with less. And I think it's just wonderful. It's like a brotherhood of essentially Orthodox Christians. Although you don't have to be an Orthodox Christian to join this brigade and battalion. However, you will be, so to speak, involuntarily catechized by being around so many Christians and influenced by them and their Russian sort of based patriotic culture. It's amazing that you even got to see them, speak to them, and sort of hear their frank and honest opinions without any, like, weird journalistic mishmash that you see on mainstream television. Like, this is awesome.
Yeah, the Constantine was the guy behind the guy in the red beret. I'm forgetting the guy with the red beret's name. He told me, and he, they were all very cool guys, very chill individuals. There's a lot of, I talked to them about some stuff, that wasn't on camera, obviously, before we went to this place where we were talking. But yeah, you can see the other guy. I think this guy was Alexander, the guy who I'm talking to at the very beginning of the video. In the thing, he's wearing a New York Yankees hat. I guess he just likes the Yankees. And I mean, this hat I'm wearing, this is technically an official hat from the Russian military with the patch and everything. You can see, you can take this off. That a lot of people have this, but I put this back on. Yeah, the gear that everybody had was quite extensive. There's the idea of people being undersupply. Hey, we got Alan Wong in chat. People can behave now. The wrench has arrived. But yeah, and remember, everybody, we will answer all the super chats at some point. Even if you can ask any question you want, even if it doesn't have to do with what we're talking about right now, we will answer it at the end. So don't be afraid to send something in. But yeah, what was I going to say about this? Yeah, he was wearing a New York Yankees hat. He had his beret on. Everyone else they had their. This is basically the same hat I was wearing on this guy near the far left. And yeah, let's watch the beginning of the video here.
Okay, so we're in a troop-carrying vehicle with the volunteer Alexander Nevsky Brigade somewhere here between Donetsk and Lugansk. And these are volunteers. We are in.
All right, so Dmitry, what are the functional differences between the the volunteer brigades and the others? What's the what's the sort of organizational distinctions between the different types of soldiers right now in the SMO?
Well, the key difference is that volunteer brigades, as you can imagine, are more flexible and dynamic. You can actually leave them and break your contract at any point. You will need a good reason, and you will be essentially, especially if you leave ahead of time from the front line itself, you speak to your commander, you say, look, I have to go home, my parents are sick or something, right? You will be allowed to do that. You won't be court-martialed, you won't be reprimanded like from the regular armed forces. If you sign a contract with the Russian military through the government, you will be forced to serve not just your 6 to 12 months, but you will be recalled according to their whim. You'll be also in the reserves, right? So essentially you're signing up for essentially an indefinite period of time. And clearly with rotations, however, if the conflict ever intensifies in the next few years, you'll be recalled back into service. So it's a lot more inflexible. Also, you can't guarantee which particular unit, which company, which brigade or battalion you'll be delegated to. So you might be delegated into a unit being led by, for example, a Russian, maybe Soviet boomer, or an atheist, or God forbid, some sort of pagan, right, or someone from a confused background. Whereas here, these men know exactly which battalion they're stepping into. They know they're led by Orthodox Christian commanders, right? And the Alexander Nevsky battalion, to be sure, has at least between 4,000 and 5,000 troops in total. So this is a small segment. This is a small unit out of the entire whole. There is actually, there are tank brigades inside of the battalion, just to be sure. So there's tanks, and the men in the tanks wear Alexander Nevsky badges. It's been expanded greatly since 2022. And the other benefit, of course, of volunteer brigades, generally speaking, is in the trenches, so to speak, the talk goes, and I've been following this very closely, is that they just have better commanders, period. Like better sergeants, lieutenants, colonels, the people on the ground who actually take orders from. They respect their troops a lot more because there's more of that volunteer-like spirit. They are, by the way, because they are called volunteers, so to speak, you might think, oh, so these people are there essentially gratuitously doing the work for free. No, they are being paid. Sometimes 5 to 10% more than even the regular armed forces. And also, because of the Russian government has been so accommodating, they've actually, and this unfortunately I think didn't happen in 2022 at the beginning of the special military operation, but later on the Russian government integrated its compensation schemes into the volunteer forces as well, because now there's, I don't want to give random numbers, but there's at least 50,000 at least volunteers out of the overall forces stationed in eastern well, essentially Eastern Malorussia at the moment. So at least 50,000 troops plus are in these volunteer type brigades. There's all kinds of different ones. There's secular ones like Bars 13, 14, 15. There's obviously the religious Orthodox Christian battalions and brigades of Alexander Nevsky and the other saints, Prophet Elijah, Saint Andrew the First called, etc. I believe there might even be a battalion of Saint Yevgeny Rodionov, but if true, that is extremely based. And of course, Saint Nicholas II and other great saints of the church, who are these patron saints of these military groups. And we know this is Christian, essentially, tradition, because going back to Byzantine times, and we cover this in our episode, all these, I believe it was over a year ago, about Saint Nicephorus Phocas. It is essentially, there have been patron saints of literally military units, companies, and maybe entire armies going back 1,000 years ago in the Byzantine Roman days. So this is not like the Russians are not inventing things by naming military units and detachments after saints. Of course, the last benefit of the volunteer brigades, Conrad, is they are still, of course, part of the Russian army. It's not like Wagner was probably the biggest volunteer/mercenary. It was bigger than a brigade, actually. It was almost an entire army in and of itself. They are given orders from the top, so the generals will allocate to them a certain portion of the front line. They'll say, okay, in this 100-kilometer stretch, you men have to hold this line. We won't interfere too much, but if the upper command says go forward and engage or besiege a certain city, then that particular volunteer brigade or battalion will need to follow those orders. But generally speaking, in the day-to-day, there might be several months where there's almost no commands from the top, and they just have to coordinate themselves. So that sort of freedom. Think of it as just like the Cossack forces during the Russian Empire, who had, they had their own cavalry, they had their own artillery, they had their own, essentially, old-school snipers, scouts, but generally they would function within the Russian imperial infantry and cavalry unit system, just somewhat disconnected, and they'd be led by their own based commanders from these same Zaporozhye Don steppes, with their horses. So it's very interesting. I think generally speaking, volunteer brigades, battalions, they're for people as well with knowledge. Notice most of these people are already veterans and experienced. They could already retire, but they're choosing to fight in this particular brigade battalion. It's a good mixing of experienced and inexperienced troops, and they can learn from one another, obviously. So it's really good. But the only threshold is you need to serve to join one of these battalions. You need to serve at least 1 year in the Russian, do your basic training. You need your ticket confirming that your basic training has been done. Otherwise, they just simply won't let you in. And so it's quite an awesome development, I think. It, again, goes back to early Russian historical tradition. This is not something that Putin invented or some sort of oligarchs invented around the Kremlin. This is really just basic Russian volunteerism, really. Think about the liberation of Moscow in 1612, like literally Kuzma Minin and Dmitry Pozharsky, the liberation of Moscow from the Poles. That entire thing was a volunteer, essentially the Russians went in by choice, joined the army and liberated Moscow from essentially these Western invaders from Poland. And of course, Talmudic invaders as well. There was that element too during that 1612 war. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself. That's probably the main key differences. It's still the Russian army, just with more freedom and essentially, typically, better commanders.
Yeah, if you watch we'll play a bit more of the interview, but part of why the guys want to join this brigade is because they sustain less casualties, because they have, good commanders. So that's important. But quickly, before we play the rest of this, I wanted to show. Let's go over to Telegram. The actual Telegram channel for the St. Alexander Nevsky Brigade. They posted this video. What was the worst atrocity or the worst example of evil seen? That involves me with there's my phone being filmed with Andre. They were filming on a better camera, and they had, me asking some of the questions. And eventually they filmed an interview with me on this camera that's going to be published at some point. So if you go to the World War Now Telegram, you can find this channel. You can follow this brigade on Telegram, and they have an interview. I don't know if it's been released quite yet, but they have an interview with me that will be dropping at some point, and you'll be able to find it obviously on our Telegram channel. So very, very high production value, some good looking stuff. But we'll head back over to the Substack, and we'll watch the first minute or so of this, and then maybe 1 or 2 minutes past the paywall, so y'all can get a bit more than what was already available, and then we'll eventually switch over and talk about the rest of it.
This is called an Akhmat. It's a huge troop-carrying device made in Chechnya. Quite the interesting ride. And I'm here. You said you speak the best English.
Yes, just a little bit.
So how long has it been since you guys were on the front?
5 years.
5 years you've been here.
Yes.
And how long since you were actually there and now you're back?
Бывает, делаю свою работу там, бывает, делаю свою работу здесь. Все зависит от поставленных мне моих боевых задач.
So, is there a reason why you wanted to join the Alexander Nevsky Volunteer Brigade? Specifically?
Почему? Потому что здесь много моих друзей. Здесь очень хорошее командование. Здесь заботятся о личном составе. Мы делаем все, мы продвигаемся вперед. Мы правильно делаем свою работу. Поэтому мне здесь все нравится.
So this brigade takes less casualties than others.
Yes, exactly.
That's good to hear. Are you an Orthodox Christian?
Yes.
Did that have any effect on wanting to join and fight with Alexander Nevsky on your arm?
Безусловно.
Absolutely.
Does your Christian faith, how does that affect how you treat even the enemy on the battlefield?
Врагу мы беспощадны. Но при этом всем мы уважаем своего противника.
Good. So, ever since the war began in America, more and more Christians are realizing that this is actually a very spiritual war between, in many ways, the forces of good and evil, the forces of Christianity versus secularism. Is that something you guys feel here on the battlefield?
Я согласен в неком случае. Только потому, что действительно мы воюем с ребятами, которые придерживаются той же веры, что и наша вера. Они такой же веры, они христиане, они православные. Другого сказать не могу. Но это повлияло на то, что мы действительно воюем. Это действительно так. И всяческая война, она смертоподобна. Поэтому то, что мы верим в Бога, это нам помогает. Мы воюем.
So yeah, maybe we'll watch a little more in a second, but yeah, no, it was quite, there was quite the bumpy ride walking through there. Hit my head on the ceiling of the Akhmat several times, and I wasn't wearing a helmet or a hat like the rest of everybody else, so it didn't hurt that bad. But it was quite fun. It was then getting in and out. It's quite the you got to step down. I have that on. If you get behind the paywall, you can see the whole part where I get out of the Akhmat and everything, and then I ask the guys different questions out in the field. Where we're stopped right here, this is at the monastery founded by Elder Zosima. This church, it's like a 1/8 size or something model of the Uspensky Cathedral, like a 1/4. It's pretty big, so I think it's maybe more like 1/3 or 1/4 the size of the Uspensky Cathedral in the Kremlin. And this is one of the tank shells that have been fired through the side of it by the Ukrainians. And these guys that I was talking to were all keenly aware of the ongoing persecutions that were going on and the people that they were, liberating. They knew all of that side of things, and they receive, they talk about how they receive communion before every battle. They talk, but like he said, even though these guys are, brutal, these guys have potentially killed hundreds of people in war. They still recognize that it is a tragedy that many of the other people that they are fighting are also Orthodox Christians.
Exactly. And I'll just point out, and there's Orthodox Christians who are obviously learned and they know the canons. They'll probably mention, I think it was the 13th canon of St. Basil the Great, which essentially states that if somebody has participated in warfare and has killed another in combat, obviously that isn't the same as homicide, it isn't murder, but maybe it's something akin to manslaughter, right? For example, hitting someone accidentally, involuntarily with a vehicle. But you still need to restrain yourself for communion for a certain period of time. I believe St. Basil's recommendation was 2 years. Now, clearly, economia and the local application of that rule by your bishop or your priest with the permission of the bishop can alleviate or change that particular condition. But specifically when warfare became a lot bloodier, and this is evident from around the Napoleonic times, when armies got much bigger and essentially combat campaigns were very elongated, outstretched. The losses became much broader in terms of combat. There'd be a lot more. Well, like armies would simply devastated if they would lose a particular battle. And during the Crimean War specifically, and the Crimean War was accommodated. Like the Russians did have their own saints supporting them during that war, like Saint Innocent of Kherson, right? So literally a saint, a bishop from that particular region of Kherson that obviously the Russians are trying to liberate at the moment. Or Ignatiy Brinchaninov, for example, is another notable saint from the time who obviously supported Russia during the Crimean War. But during the First World War, when the Russians also had an aspect of trench warfare in the Eastern Front, not like what you had between the Germans and the French in the West, which we see in a lot of the video footage of the horrors of the First World War, trench warfare. But how does communion come into this? Well, the church has made, essentially, the Russian church specifically, the Russian local church has made has given leniencies to troops on the front line before a battle. It is considered that most likely the Orthodox warrior is not going into battle to kill others. He's essentially going into battle to sacrifice himself. And so even though perhaps previously, a week ago or a month ago, he has actually slain another person and has killed him in combat, he's still allowed to obtain communion prior to his prospective death in this coming battle. And this is why what the soldier says about we take communion before every battle is super key. They don't just take communion every Sunday just because. But if they're literally in the trenches themselves, it's been at least a 100 plus 200 year tradition during the severity of warfare. And I think moving forward in the future, as like the Third World War progresses, right, this will probably continue, unfortunately, as the world becomes a much darker place. Communion for those on the front lines is given with those considerations. So those restrictions that St. Basil spoke about, 1600 years ago, they're not incorrect. It's just, unfortunately, combat has really changed to where you literally sit in a trench and you may be sent forward into battle or to besiege a city or a particular village, like what's happening in Ukraine, or an apartment building, and you may die via, just being killed by a drone or artillery strike at any moment. And so it isn't wrong for you to partake of communion or to receive confession beforehand. So that's the new sort of norm. I just want to explain that to anyone who's like very far and they know the Orthodox Christian history. They may think it's unusual. Why are soldiers receiving communion so often? And that's the reason. It's not because they're doing it. It's not because the priests are misapplying Orthodox tradition somehow. This is actually a new development, you can almost say, to accommodate for the modern chaotic nature of warfare.
And you can see on this guy in particular, he's got the Wagner patch, just right there underneath the subtitles here. And we'll watch 1 or 2 more minutes of this a little bit, and then we'll do the rest of it behind the paywall. But I wanted to point out one other thing. You're talking about the bishops and people on the front line. I wanted to go rewind to this part of the intro near the very beginning. Yeah, here's me receiving a blessing from Metropolitan Mitrofan of Gorlovka. He's the bishop of Gorlovka, which is one of the larger towns in the Donetsk People's Republic. He's in my opinion, I thought he was a very, very holy, very serious pastor, a very serious bishop. I believe he's been the bishop there since 2007. They have a beautiful cathedral that'll be in an upcoming video that, again, if you're behind the paywall, you'll immediately get access to. And his cathedral's been struck several times. His residence has been struck several times by drones and by Ukrainian missiles. And he's never done any interviews with journalists, Russian or Western, before at all. And I was able to be the first journalist to speak with him. He's never talked to any before. So my interview is being subtitled as we speak, and it will be released within the next few weeks. You'll be able to see, I ask him all sorts of questions about the persecution, because much of his diocese, before the SMO began, especially, a huge amount of his metropolis was fully under the Ukrainians, major persecution from the schismatics, from the state, from radical anti-Orthodox people, has occurred. And, even before the current Metropolitan Vladimir of Donetsk was in power, the old Metropolitan of Donetsk was not particularly fond of Russia or the Russian saints. He hated the royal martyrs and many of the other saints, whereas Metropolitan Mitrofan, he steadfastly, continued venerating, the saints that are so beloved by the people there. and he, as you can see, he cares about the Tsar and about them a lot. So it's a great conversation. He was very hospitable to us, so it was a good time. So stay tuned for that. I wanted to point that out. He has many people, obviously, in his metropolis have died because of the shellings. Many people have gone and fought. So, he's been heavily involved in ministering to people. And, one of the big things, over 50,000 baptisms have happened across the front line by, for soldiers, across in the SMO zone. So there really is a spiritual element to all of this. But I'm trying to get back to where we were. It was about 2:30 or whatever it was.
Versus secularism, is that something you guys feel here on the battlefield?
Я согласен, православные. Другого сказать не могу. Но это повлияло на то, что мы действительно воюем. Перед боем мы молимся. У нас есть свои церковные, у нас есть свои батюшки. Мы очень верующие люди, поэтому мы опираемся на него перед нашими боевыми действиями.
Что, выходим? Да. Давайте. Вам будет легче потом вылезти. I guess I didn't understand the last question about it.
Just got out of the troop carrier. We're here between Donetsk and Luhansk, somewhere in the SMO zone.
So, you guys, as members of the Alexander Nevsky...
All right, we'll pause it there. We'll watch the rest of it when we get behind the paywall for paid subscribers. But you can see us having gotten out of the vehicle. We're out in the boonies there near that lake. It was very cool. At one point, I don't think you can see it in this picture, this particular picture, but sometime while these pictures were being taken, a jet did like an evasive maneuver, like back behind, to the left side of the picture where the blue sky is, and you could see like the contrail, like in this weird shape where the jet, rapidly turned around. So it was, you could see that all the time in the sky, the different anti-aircraft, things, drones themselves, jets, taking evasive maneuvers, leaving interesting trails in the sky and everything. So it was quite the experience walking around. At one point we did see a drone right at dusk. We saw a drone get intercepted by air defense, just over Donetsk as we were driving back into the city. It was quite cool to see. I started filming, but you couldn't really see it from where I was filming in the car, and the glare off the glass and the part of the car was blocking it. So it wasn't really worth posting. No one would really see what it was, but I was able to see it with my own eyes. It was very cool. And at some point as well, when I talk about the going to that service at that monastery with the Metropolitan, who's 6'10", when we talk about that, there was a Ukrainian drone flying overhead that went over us. Supposedly it hit something else, and then of course everyone heard the story I said on Buck's stream and on the latest World War Now episodes where the missile hit not too far from the church service itself. It was very loud, sort of shook everything, and I haven't been able to find anybody that filmed it, even though I was filming a huge amount of the service. I wasn't filming, and despite there being camera people filming the whole time, I haven't been able to track down the footage from any of them. So I guess that's just lost media, but it was, quite the experience. I'll keep obviously talking about it in these upcoming episodes. And, eventually, once the next one comes out, I'll probably make the first one eventually free, but there will be certain things that will stay behind the paywall because, you got to incentivize people to get behind the paywall. Because if I didn't have the paywall and people weren't supporting the show, then I wouldn't be able to travel and do all these trips and bring this journalism to everybody. So please consider, if you enjoy this work, if you enjoy the content, please consider, like I said, getting behind the paywall and supporting us here at World War Now. Got a few people watching again. Not the busiest. I know I should have probably announced this stream a few days in advance. It isn't a usual streaming time, but hey, the replay will serve its value, and people can then get behind the paywall and watch the replay of the stream that we're about to do over on Substack. We're about 55 minutes in. We got to answer the super chat from A2ZZGK. They ask, hello, Conrad and Dmitriy. Thoughts on the decision by the EP regarding the deposition of His Eminence Metropolitan Tychikos of Paphos. Lord have mercy. Thank you so much for the question, A2Z. If anybody else has any questions, again, regardless of topic, please send in a super chat. We will do our best to answer them here in the last 10 minutes or so of this stream. But as far as the decision, unfortunately, despite being not surprised in any way, it's still really tough to see. He's not going to be the Metropolitan of Paphos anymore. I guess he's just going to be some auxiliary vicar bishop. They probably just send Maybe they'll send him to a monastery or something. Maybe at best he'll get to be an abbot somewhere, but I'd be surprised if they even wanted to give him that much power. So very disappointing situation. And the real fear is that after this victory, they might feel emboldened to go after Metropolitan Neophytos or Metropolitan Athanasios or any of the other bishops that haven't, succumbed to the, to the OCU Ukrainian schismatic nonsense and to the ecumenism that Archbishop Georgios and the other bishops in Cyprus are totally caving to in being total stooges and cucks of the ecumenical patriarch and the Fanar. So very, very disappointing. I don't know what else we do from here. I mean, I think the Russians should step in. They have canonical interest in Cyprus. I would support that, but again, I don't think they want to deepen the schism more than it already is. Unfortunately, the only thing that's going to fix this is the new crew of the ship that St. Porphyrios talked about. They're going to have to come and there's going to have to be ecumenical councils, and unfortunately, there's probably going to have to be an expansion of World War III before these people really learn their lessons.
Absolutely. Look, there's also consider the fact that the ecumenical patriarch probably did not want to overturn that decision of, Archbishop George III, recently elected, because Cyprus, of course, in terms of church ecclesiology, if we think about it somewhat politically, unfortunately, it does support the EP and its decisions. It's a steadfast ally of the EP. So if there was ever a major church council, Cyprus and George III, or the majority of the Cypriot bishops, we'd hope, unfortunately, they wouldn't, but they probably would side of the EP. So the EP overturning this decision to essentially oust, Bishop Tychikos would essentially probably would come from as a political consideration for the future as well. So it's like a calculated, it may not even be based on the actual materials that were presented to them. You'd think the EP and its appellate sort of structure would work properly into sort of review these decisions, but if it reviews the decision and says that the Synod of the Church of Cyprus is wrong, it's almost like a slap in the face of disrespect. It's like, look at you, Church of Cyprus, you aren't even able to make proper clerical decisions in relation to your higher bishops, right, during these court sessions. I mean, it's quite an unfortunate development. I think in some ways the entire appellate structure has lost all of its grace in a way, which is unfortunate, because it was there from the very beginning, from the time of the establishment of the city of Constantinople. So very unfortunate.
No, it really is. And we got to keep praying for Cyprus. We got to keep praying for Metropolitan Tychikos, Metropolitan Neophytos, and all the bishops there, that maybe they would see the light and realize they did something wrong and somehow reinstate him. But now that the EP has stepped in, I think they're probably feeling like they did the right thing, and they're feeling very emboldened. But again, just got to keep the whole situation in prayer. There's still great bishops in Cyprus. Unfortunately, just one less than they used to have. So again, any final super chats, we'll do our best to answer. I'm not seeing any more. So like I said before, link down below, worldwarnow.co. I'll share the screen. Actually, we'll exit this for now. Go to worldwarnow.co. Excuse me, burping. Right here, get behind the paywall. You get access to not just the full frontline interview, but also Death of Empire, our full documentary that hopefully I will actually be interviewing Metropolitan Tikhon of Crimea soon. I don't want to give away too many details, but that's coming. You get access to the full Ritual, Regicide, Martyrdom of the Romanovs article series, all of our episodes with Anthony of Westgate, all of our episodes with Truth Teller, Jay Dyer, all sorts of other fantastic Ether Hour episodes. Of course, we have recent episodes with Cameron McGregor, with Father Peter Hears, Father John Whiteford, a lot of fantastic priests. So again, get behind the paywall, support the show, support the journalism and the trips that I've been able to take and bring this information to you, going to, not so safe places. So, I really hope that everybody is enjoying the content. We're almost at an hour. Normally I'd play some Ethno-Guesser. Hopefully I'll be back on that perhaps this coming Tuesday with a normal World War live stream. But alas, we've hit the hour. We can probably end things. Dmitry, do you have any final words on maybe what's going on in Russia, Ukraine right now? Any final updates maybe before we get to the next World War Now episode in a few days?
Well, no, I just think the entire discussion about handing over of Tomahawk missiles, the escalation of the conflict, obviously, Storm Shadow missiles already being used, so there's already long-range weaponry, and Conrad himself just being literally 50 kilometers away from Konstantinovka, 90 kilometers away from Pokrovsk, and right next to Tadetsk, basically in the same, like in 20 minutes drive away from Tadetsk. We just have to keep Conrad in our prayers, I think, especially given the next 2 weeks. We don't know how this conflict will go over. Generally, this summer, June, July, August, has been very good for Russia. Compare it to the summer of Ukraine, right? The Ukrainian counteroffensive of 2023. The difference is obvious, right? If anything, the Ukrainian sort of August, September offensive in Kursk last year was much more effective at maybe throwing Russia off a little bit. But this year, it's been, the ball has been in Russia's court. Russia has had all the aces, and I think the scary part is, as we said on our World War Now episode, Ukraine, Zelensky, it's a rat backed into a corner. We've seen the recent strikes on Gorlovka itself and Donetsk, which are well and truly 100 kilometers away from the front lines. These strikes are not targeting military targets. They're shooting at civilians for reasons of just general demoralization, to try and essentially make the lives of regular folks worse. And these are people who, and Conrad could attest to this, when they hear explosions, they don't even flinch. Like, we're talking, I'm not going to say PTSD, but it's essentially, they have gotten used to hearing artillery, bomb explosions, drones, things like that over the last 10, 11 years since 2014. The people living in Gorlovka, Donetsk, there's 1 million plus people, and we can't, God knows how many refugees have already left these sort of lands that have been enthralled in battle for so long. So it's very unfortunate, but that's still the status quo on the ground. Still imminent danger, and that's why a lot of the people that remain are, of course, steadfast Orthodox Christians. Because, as a good friend told me when I was discussing the situation on the front lines, it's best to just be essentially living a very disciplined Christian life, right? Because at any moment, a drone could smash into you, a HIMARS might strike you, and obviously Ukraine will never apologize for slaying you as a regular civilian or a member of the military. It's just, you just have to be good with Christ and be essentially be assured, go to confession regularly, take communion as regularly as possible, read the scripture, because you're basically in imminent danger and, living in anticipation of, potential death. So you want to accept it as an Orthodox Christian. So that's basically the reality on the front line for civilians. And I think those in the military who Conrad essentially interviewed, it's almost the same experience, right? So just have to obviously keep all of the Russians and those who still consider themselves Ukrainians and Malorussia and Novorossia in our prayers, because, they're all victims of this.
No, it's true. And I just, as you said that, I wanted to show this. This was like a week and a half after I left Russia. I was specifically on this street, like in this video, if you see where my cursor is, I don't know if it's playing. I don't think it's playing on the, I don't know why it's not playing for everybody, but literally this street right here, the video shows this place that had been blown out by drones and missiles. And I was standing like right here, like just a week and a half ago, I was standing right there. And so I guess if this had happened then, I would be dead. So it's important to realize, like, while I was there, the cities were largely peaceful. There was even a bigger attack there was a big attack even on Moscow when I was there, and at the city center, thankfully the drones didn't get that close. But got to realize that, these things affect real people. And now that I've been there, it's, it's crazy to imagine this. And it's, when I go back, I'm going to have to be careful, because it seems the Ukrainians are increasing their terror attacks just on civilians in these places to demoralize and to, punish these people for having the gall to want to, rejoin Russia. But like you were mentioning, Dmitry, with PTSD, and I'm not just trying to use this to like content farm, but, we're going to watch them react to the rest of the interview, the frontline interview for paid subscribers. I also, we were going to interview this guy who was basically like a war hero who had been given many medals and had survived in a sort of miraculous way, but he didn't want to let us pull out the cameras. He was, still too shaken up and had so much PTSD just trying to recount the story that happened to him that we didn't film him. We just let him recount the story and asked him some questions and, prayed for him and talked to him about it. But I'll talk a bit about that behind the paywall as well. It's quite a fascinating story. I want to talk about it with some reverence. But it's been over an hour here. Thank you all for everyone that tuned in. Thank you for the super chats. If you are watching the replay of this, don't worry. The replay of this stream, of the paywall stream that we're about to start will be available for paid subscribers in a replay form. So if you enjoyed this, if you enjoyed what we talked about, go down to the description below, go to worldwarnow.co, get behind the paywall, and you'll be able to watch the full replay of the stream that we're about to do, where we react, give our, sort of director's commentary, as it were, to the rest of the interview with the St. Alexander Nevsky Brigade. I recount a few more stories from my time in the Donbass, maybe break a bit of news about my upcoming trip there that I don't want to just spill to the whole World Wide Web. But with all of that, again, thank you all so much for tuning into this stream, and I will leave us with the outro music here. So let's let that run.